If you warn the devil, you'd better be ready to disappear. The cold metal of the gun pressed against my temple felt unreal. Like something from a movie I wasn't supposed to be in. The alley smelled like rain and old concrete. And I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the distant traffic. Too fast, too loud, like it was trying to betray me before I could say a word. You warned him, didn't you? The voice asked, calm, almost curious. And that scared me more than anything else because calm meant control, and control meant I wasn't the one who had it. I swallowed, my throat dry, my fingers still trembling from a night that hadn't even ended yet. A night that started with soft jazz and polished glass, and ended with me here, cornered, exposed, involved. I closed my eyes for half a second, and everything rushed back. The lights, the music, the way the restaurant glowed like nothing bad could ever happen inside it. Like money could keep danger out. I was wrong. I always am when it comes to men like him. Adrian Volkov didn't walk into places. He changed them. The moment he stepped through those doors, conversations lowered, shoulders stiffened. Even the air felt heavier, like it knew who he was before anyone said his name. I remember balancing a tray of drinks, trying not to look at him. Failing. Everyone fails eventually. He sat like he owned more than just the room, like he owned outcomes. And maybe he did, but it wasn't him that caught my attention first, it was her. Sofia DeLuca, the woman at his side. Perfect smile, perfect posture, but her eyes kept moving, scanning, calculating. Not the way someone in love looks at a man like that. No, it was something else, something colder. I saw her slip her phone under the table, just for a second, just long enough. A message flashed across the screen before it disappeared. 3 words that didn't belong in a place like that. Tonight. After. Toast. My stomach dropped. I didn't know why. Not yet. But instinct doesn't wait for logic. It just pulls. And I felt it pulling hard. I should have ignored it. Kept serving drinks. Kept my head down. That's how you survive in places like that. You don't see. You don't hear. You don't exist. But then she leaned closer to one of the men at the table. Her voice low. Too low to catch everything. But I heard enough. Once he stands, no second chance. And suddenly the room didn't feel safe anymore. The lights felt too bright. The music too loud. Like it was all trying to hide something underneath. I looked at Adrian again. Really looked this time. And for a second, just a second, I thought he already knew. But then he reached for his glass. Calm, unaware, or pretending to be. And that's when I realized something worse. If I was right, he had seconds, maybe less. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. I grabbed a napkin, a pen. The letters came out messy, rushed, but clear enough. Your girl sold you out. Run now. I folded it once, twice, my pulse in my fingertips, and when I stepped toward him, I felt like I was walking into something I couldn't walk back out of. I set the drink down, let the note slip beneath his hand like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. But the second his fingers brushed the paper, his eyes lifted, and they found mine, and in that moment, everything stopped, because I knew he understood, and I knew I was no longer invisible. He did not unfold the note right away, and that was the first thing that told me I had made a mistake, because a normal man would have reacted, confused, maybe startled, but Adrian Volkov only rested his fingers on the folded paper like it had always belonged there, like he had been expecting something to arrive, just not knowing when. His eyes stayed on mine for 1 second longer than necessary, and in that second I felt it. The shift, subtle but undeniable, like a door closing somewhere behind me. Then he looked away, smooth, controlled, lifting his glass as if nothing had changed, as if I had not just handed him a warning that could decide whether he walked out alive. I turned before anyone could notice the way my hands shook, before Sophia could see anything in my face, and I moved back toward the service station with measured steps, counting them in my head. 1, 2, 3. Like that could slow my pulse. Like that could undo what I had just done. I should have stayed out of it. I should have kept my head down. But it was too late for should have. The moment had already passed, and now everything felt wrong. The music was still playing, but it sounded distant, muffled, like it was underwater. Glasses clinked, people laughed, but none of it reached me the same way, because now I was watching, really watching, and once you start seeing, you cannot stop. I saw the way Sophia's smile did not reach her eyes, the way her hand rested lightly on the table, but her fingers tapped once, twice, a rhythm that did not match the music. I saw one of the men near the bar adjust his jacket just slightly, like he was checking something underneath, and I saw Adrian finally move, just a small motion, his thumb sliding the note open beneath the table, hidden from everyone but me. His gaze did not drop to read it, not at first. He kept looking ahead, listening, calculating, and then, slowly, almost lazily, his eyes flicked down, just for a fraction of a second, and when they came back up, something in them had changed, not fear, not surprise, something colder, sharper, like a decision had just been made. He set his glass down without drinking, and that was when I knew he believed me, because men like him do not hesitate unless something matters. I felt my breath catch, my chest tightening as the seconds stretched. I expected chaos. I expected something loud, something obvious, but nothing happened. And somehow that was worse, because silence meant control, and control meant whatever was coming would not be random. It would be precise. I took a step back, then another, trying to disappear into the background again, trying to become invisible like before, but it did not work, because once someone like Adrian Volkov sees you, you do not go unseen again. I felt it before I saw it, his attention returning to me, not directly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough, always enough, like a thread had been tied between us the moment I handed him that note, and now it was pulling tight. The server beside me whispered something about table 12 needing refills, her voice normal, unaware, and I nodded automatically, forcing my hands to steady as I reached for the tray, because whatever was about to happen, the room had not caught up to it yet. The illusion was still intact, and I was standing right in the middle of it, knowing it was about to break. The tray felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of it had doubled in the last 10 seconds, like every glass on it knew something I did not. I moved toward table 12 again, because routine was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Because if I stopped moving, I would start thinking, and thinking would make me run, and running would make me visible, and being visible was the last thing I could afford right now. I kept my eyes down at first, focused on the reflections in the polished wood, on the way the overhead lights fractured across the glass rims, anything but the people sitting there. But the closer I got, the more I felt it, the tension, subtle but spreading, like a crack in glass you only notice when it is already too late. Adrian had shifted in his seat. Not much, just enough that his back was no longer fully exposed to the room. Just enough that he could see more than before without anyone realizing it. It was the kind of movement that meant everything, and nothing at the same time. Sophia leaned closer to him, her voice soft, her expression perfect, but I saw the way her eyes searched his face, like she was looking for something that was not there anymore. "You are quiet tonight," she said, light, teasing, the kind of tone that would fool anyone who was not paying attention. But I was paying attention now. I could not stop. Adrian's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, something more controlled. "I am listening," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made my skin prickle, like the words carried a second meaning only a few people in the room would understand. I set the glasses down one by one, careful, steady, willing my hands not to betray me. When I reached him, his fingers brushed mine for just a fraction of a second as he took the glass, and it was not accidental. I knew it was not. His touch was deliberate, grounding, like he was confirming something, or maybe marking it. I pulled back quickly, my breath catching, but I did not look at him. I could not again, because I had the sudden, overwhelming certainty that if I did, I would not be able to pretend this was just another shift anymore. I stepped away, but I did not go far. Something held me there, a sense that leaving now would be a mistake, that whatever was about to happen needed a witness, or maybe I just needed to know if I had made the right choice. The lights flickered for a second, so brief most people would not notice, but I did, and so did Adrian. His gaze flicked upward, then toward the far side of the room, where one of the staff doors had just closed a little too quickly. The music did not stop, the conversations did not falter, but the illusion cracked just a little wider. Sophia reached for her glass, her hand steady, but her shoulders were tense now, almost imperceptibly, like she was bracing for something, like she was waiting for a moment only she knew was coming. And that was when I realized the most terrifying part of all of it. She thought she was still in control. She thought whatever was planned would unfold exactly the way she expected, but Adrian was already ahead of it. I could see it in the stillness of him, in the way he did not rush, did not react, just adjusted, adapted, like the entire room was a chessboard, and he had just seen the final move before anyone else had even made the first. My heart pounded harder, louder, because now I understood. I had not just warned him, I had stepped into something far bigger than a single moment, something that had already been in motion long before I ever picked up that pen, and now there was no stepping out of it, only forward, only through, and as I stood there, frozen between staying and running, Adrian lifted his glass slightly, not to drink, just to signal, subtle, almost invisible, but enough, and somewhere behind me, a door opened again, slower this time, deliberate, like the next move had just been made. The air shifted before anything visible happened, like a pressure drop you feel in your ears before a storm, subtle but undeniable, and suddenly every instinct in my body was screaming at me to move, to get out, to disappear. Before whatever came next unfolded, but my feet stayed where they were, rooted, caught between fear and something else I could not name, because part of me needed to see it through, needed to know if the choice I made had mattered. Adrian did not turn his head, did not break the rhythm of the room, but his fingers tapped once against the side of his glass, slow, controlled, like a metronome only a few people could hear, and somewhere behind me, I heard it, a shift in footsteps, not rushed, not chaotic, just repositioning, the kind that does not draw attention unless you are already looking for it. I should not have been looking, but I was. I always am when something feels off. The staff door at the back opened just enough to let two men step through, dressed like everyone else, tailored suits, calm expressions, but their eyes moved differently, sharper, more aware, scanning in patterns instead of casually. And that was when I realized this was not just a trap set for Adrian. This was a room already divided into people who knew and people who did not, and I was standing right on the line between them. Sophia lifted her glass then, a small, elegant motion, the kind that would normally signal nothing more than a toast. But her gaze flicked to Adrian with something almost expectant, like she was waiting for him to follow, waiting for a cue that never came, because Adrian did not lift his glass. He only watched her, not openly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it, the stillness in him tightening, like a coil pulling inward instead of snapping outward, and for the first time, uncertainty crossed her face, just a flicker, gone almost instantly, but it was there, and it told me everything I needed to know. Whatever she had planned was no longer unfolding the way she expected. The music swelled slightly, the band hitting a brighter note that felt out of place against the weight settling over the room. Conversations continued, laughter drifted from nearby tables, but it all felt fragile now, like it could shatter with the wrong move. I took a slow step backward, then another, trying to edge toward the hallway without drawing attention. Because suddenly I understood something else, something colder. I was not supposed to still be here. People like me, people who saw too much, were not part of how these nights ended. My breath came shallow, controlled, every movement measured. But before I could take another step, Adrian's voice cut through the space between us, low, calm, not loud enough to carry far, but enough to stop me completely. "Stay where you are," he said, not looking at me, not needing to. And the words landed heavier than anything else that had happened so far, because they were not a request, they were not even a warning, they were a decision already made. My chest tightened, my instinct screaming to run louder than ever, but I did not move. I could not, because something in the way he said it told me that running now would not save me. It would only make me a target, and for a second, just a second, I realized the truth I had been avoiding since the moment I picked up that pen. I had not just warned him. I had stepped into his world, and now he was not letting me step back out. The room did not explode into chaos the way I expected. There was no sudden noise, no obvious signal that something had gone wrong. And that was what made it worse, because everything stayed almost perfectly the same, just slightly off, like a painting where one detail had been moved, and now nothing felt right anymore. Adrian remained seated, composed, his posture unchanged, but the space around him had shifted. Invisible lines drawn that only certain people could feel. I stood frozen where I was, his words still echoing in my head. "Stay where you are." And for the first time I understood that staying was not about obedience. It was about survival. Sophia lowered her glass slowly, her smile still in place, but it no longer fit her face the same way. It looked practiced now, strained at the edges. "You are not drinking," she said. Light, almost playful. But there was a question underneath it, a test. Adrian tilted his head just slightly, studying her, not answering right away, and in that pause, the air tightened even more, like everyone was waiting for something they could not name. "I prefer to watch first," he said finally, his voice calm, even, but there was something else beneath it now, something colder, more deliberate. And Sophia's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass for just a fraction of a second, so small most people would miss it. But I did not. I could not stop noticing things anymore. Not after this, not after stepping into it. One of the men near the back shifted his position again, closer to the hallway. Another adjusted his stance near the bar, subtle, coordinated, like pieces moving across a board no one else realized they were part of. My pulse pounded harder, every instinct screaming that I should not be standing in the open like this, that I should not be visible. But I also knew that moving now, suddenly, would draw the wrong kind of attention, and attention in a moment like this was dangerous in ways I did not fully understand yet. Adrian's gaze flicked toward me again, just for a second, but it was enough to remind me that he had not forgotten I was here, that I was part of whatever calculation he was making, not by choice, but by consequence. Sophia followed. That glance, her eyes landing on me for the first time since I had served the table, and I felt it immediately. The shift in her focus, sharp, assessing, like she was trying to place me, trying to understand why I mattered. My throat tightened. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, to look like nothing more than a waitress waiting for the next order, but it was too late for that. I could feel it in the way her gaze lingered just a second too long. "Do you need anything else?" I asked, my voice steady in a way I did not feel. And for a moment, no one answered. The silence stretched, thin and fragile, until Adrian spoke without looking away from Sophia. "No," he said. Then after a beat, quieter, "She is exactly where she needs to be." And the words sent a chill through me, because they were not just about the moment. They were about everything that had led to it. Sophia's expression shifted again, subtle, controlled, but there was something darker underneath now. Something that had lost patience, the perfect mask slipping just enough to reveal what was behind it. And in that instant, I realized the truth I had been trying not to face. This was no longer about a warning. It was about choosing sides, and whether I wanted to or not, I had already been chosen. The silence stretched too long, and in a room like that, silence was never empty. It was filled with decisions, calculations, outcomes that had already been chosen before anyone spoke them out loud. Sophia's eyes stayed on me now, no longer pretending I was invisible, and that alone told me everything had shifted beyond repair. Her head tilted slightly, studying me the way someone studies a problem they did not expect to have. "You," she said softly, her voice smooth but edged with something sharper underneath. "I do not remember seeing you here before." The question was simple, but the weight behind it was not. I felt every pair of eyes at the table flick toward me without fully turning, like they were waiting to see how this played out. I forced my shoulders to stay relaxed, my posture neutral. "I started last week," I said, keeping my tone even, controlled. "The way you learn to speak when you know saying too much is worse than saying nothing at all." Sophia smiled again, but this time it did not reach her eyes at all. "That is convenient," she murmured, and the word convenient landed heavier than it should have, like it carried an accusation she had not spoken yet. Adrian did not interrupt her, did not defend me, and for a brief second, panic flared in my chest, sharp and sudden, because I realized something else. He was letting this happen, letting her push, letting her test, and that meant he was waiting for something, or someone, to reveal themselves fully. I stood there, caught in the middle of a conversation that was not really about me, but somehow entirely about me at the same time. The band shifted songs, the tempo slower now, softer, but it only made the tension feel more pronounced, like everything was being drawn tighter instead of released. Sophia leaned back slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Tell me," she continued, her gaze never leaving mine. "What made you pay attention to our table tonight?" The question was too direct, too precise, and for a moment, I felt the truth rise to the surface, threatening to spill out before I could stop it. But instinct caught it, pulled it back. I shook my head lightly. "Nothing in particular, I was just doing my job." The lie sounded small, fragile even to my own ears, and I knew she heard it too. Because her expression shifted again, that same flicker of impatience, of something darker pushing closer to the surface. Adrian's voice cut in then, quiet but absolute. "That will be enough," he said, not raising his tone, not needing to, and the effect was immediate. Sophia's gaze snapped to him, surprise flashing across her face before she smoothed it away, but it was too late. I had seen it. The moment she realized she was no longer fully in control of the conversation, no longer guiding the direction of the night, Adrian set his glass down with a soft, deliberate motion, his attention fully on her now. "You are asking the wrong questions," he added, and there was something final in the way he said it, something that closed the door on whatever she had been trying to do. The room seemed to hold its breath again, the invisible lines tightening further. And in that moment, I understood what he had been waiting for. Not proof, not confirmation, but reaction, and Sophia had just given it to him. My pulse pounded harder, louder, because now there was no more pretending, no more uncertainty. Whatever came next would not be hidden behind polite conversation or soft music. It would be clear, direct, and unavoidable. And as Adrian's gaze shifted briefly back to me, just long enough to anchor me in place again, I realized something else, something that made my chest tighten even more. I was no longer just a witness to this. I was part of the outcome. The shift was no longer subtle. It was no longer something you had to look for to notice. It was there, in the way the room seemed to hold itself tighter, in the way conversations softened without anyone realizing why, in the way the staff who had been moving freely now slowed, hesitated, adjusted their paths as if guided by something unseen. Sophia's smile did not return this time. Not fully. It stayed incomplete. Like a mask she no longer had the patience to hold in place. Her eyes stayed on Adrian, searching, recalculating. And for the first time since I had noticed her, she looked unsure, not afraid, not yet, but uncertain, and that was enough. Because uncertainty in someone like her meant the plan had already started slipping. "You always did enjoy games," she said quietly, her tone softer now, but heavier, layered with something that felt closer to truth than anything she had said before. Adrian did not answer immediately. He leaned back slightly in his chair, relaxed in a way that felt intentional, controlled, like he had already stepped ahead of the moment and was simply waiting for it to catch up. "Only when I already know the ending," he replied, and something in the room seemed to still completely at those words, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that I felt it in my chest, like the air had thinned just a little more. Sophia's fingers stilled against the glass, her gaze sharpening. "And what do you think the ending is?" she asked, and this time there was no softness left in her voice, no performance, just a direct challenge. Adrian's eyes held hers, unblinking, unwavering, and for a second, it felt like nothing else existed in that room except the space between them. "That depends," he said, his voice even, almost calm, "on whether you want to leave with dignity." The words were quiet, but they landed like something final, something that could not be taken back, and I saw it then. The exact moment everything broke, not loudly, not violently, but internally. Sophia's expression shifted, not into fear, but into something colder, something resolved, like a decision had just been made on her side as well. And that was when the movement around the room changed again, no longer subtle, no longer hidden beneath casual gestures. The men who had been positioned at the edges took one step closer inward, not enough to alarm the rest of the guests, but enough to close distance, enough to narrow space. My pulse spiked, my breath catching as the reality of it settled deeper. This was no longer a conversation, no longer a test. It was the moment everything had been building toward, and I was still standing right in the center of it. Adrian's gaze flicked to me once more, brief but deliberate. And in that look, there was something new, something that had not been there before, not just awareness, not just calculation, but decision, and I understood it immediately. He was not just keeping me here because I knew too much. He was keeping me here because he had chosen to, and that realization hit harder than anything else, because choice meant responsibility. It meant connection, whether I wanted it or not. Sophia noticed it too. I saw the way her eyes followed his glance, the way her attention snapped back to me with a sharper edge than before, and for a split second, I felt it. the weight of being seen from both sides, the center point of something far bigger than I had ever intended to be part of. Interesting, she murmured, almost to herself, but loud enough for the table to hear. And the word carried a promise I did not fully understand yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty as the room tightened around us, and the illusion of normalcy finally began to fracture beyond repair. There was no version of this night where I walked away untouched. The room did not break all at once. It unraveled, slowly, deliberately, like a thread being pulled from fabric that still looked whole from a distance. Sophia leaned forward just slightly, her posture shifting from performance to intent, and in that movement, something invisible snapped into place. Dignity is overrated, she said quietly, her voice no longer soft, no longer pretending. And the words carried across the table with a weight that made even the air feel sharper. Adrian did not react. The way I expected, there was no anger, no sudden movement. Only a small exhale, almost like confirmation, like he had already accepted this outcome before she spoke it aloud. I thought you might say that, he replied, and there was something final in his tone, something that closed the last door between what was planned and what was now happening. The men positioned around the room did not rush, they did not draw attention, but they moved, subtle steps that shifted the balance of the space, creating lines, narrowing exits, guiding the flow of people who did not even realize they were being guided. I felt it in my chest, the tightening, the awareness that the invisible walls were no longer just around Adrian. They were around all of us now. Sophia's gaze flicked once more toward me, sharper than before, and this time there was no question in it, only recognition. You, she said again, quieter, more focused. You should have stayed invisible. The words landed harder than anything else she had said, not because of the threat behind them, but because they were true. I should have. I knew that. But knowing it now did not change anything. Adrian's chair moved then, just a few inches back, the sound soft against the polished floor, but it cut through the moment like a line being drawn, his presence expanding, not physically, but in a way that made everything else seem smaller, less certain. She is no longer an option, he said, not looking at me, not needing to, and for a second, I did not understand what he meant, until I did. And the realization hit like cold water. He was not just removing me from her reach, he was claiming the outcome, defining it, deciding it. Sophia's lips parted slightly, the first real break in her composure. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be, she said. And now there was something closer to frustration in her voice, controlled, but present. Adrian tilted his head just enough to meet her eyes fully. No, he said, calm, certain. I am making it clear. And the distinction mattered. I could feel it, even if I did not fully understand the depth of it yet, because clarity meant there was no more room for misinterpretation, no more room for negotiation. The room around us continued to move, people shifting, conversations continuing. But now it felt like a stage where only a few actors knew the script had changed, and everyone else was still following. The old one. My breath came slower now, not because I was calm, but because something inside me had settled, a realization that whatever happened next was already in motion, already decided in ways I could not control. Sophia leaned back slightly, her fingers releasing the glass completely, her focus narrowing entirely on Adrian now. Then let us stop pretending, she said, and there it was. The final line between what had been hidden and what would now be seen. Adrian did not answer her. Immediately, his gaze flicked to me one last time, brief but grounding, like he was anchoring me to the moment, to the outcome. And in that look, I understood something I had not wanted to admit until now. He was not just keeping me here, he was protecting me in the only way someone like him knew how, by making sure I was part of his side of the line. And as the room finally shifted past the point of no return, as the illusion dissolved completely into something sharper, clearer, and far more dangerous, I realized there was no going back to who I had been before this night, only forward into whatever he had just chosen for both of us. The moment did not explode. It settled, like dust after something invisible had already shattered. Sophia held his gaze for 1 second longer than she should have, and then she smiled. Not the polished smile from earlier, not the one meant for rooms like this, but something quieter, sharper, like she had finally accepted that whatever game she had started was no longer hers to control. "You always were ahead of me," she said, almost softly, and for the first time, there was no performance in her voice, no mask, just truth stripped down to its core. Adrian did not respond right away. He simply watched her, steady, unmoved, like a man who had already closed the chapter she was still trying to hold open. The men around the room completed their silent adjustments, positions finalized, lines drawn, and without a single raised voice, without a single obvious signal, the entire space shifted into something else entirely. Something no longer meant for the people who had come here for music and conversation. Those people continued as if nothing had changed, but I knew better now. I could feel it in the way the exits no longer felt like exits, in the way every step seemed guided by something unseen. Sophia exhaled slowly, her fingers resting flat against the table, no longer pretending to hold on to anything. "Then this is where we stop pretending," she repeated, and this time, there was no challenge left in it. Only acknowledgement. Adrian inclined his head just slightly, a gesture so small it might have meant nothing to anyone else. But here, now, it felt like a final answer, a closing statement to something that had been building long before I ever stepped into this room. Sophia pushed her chair back with a controlled motion, rising to her feet with the same grace she had carried all night. But the energy around her had changed, no longer hidden, no longer softened, just clear, defined. And for a second, just a second, her eyes found mine again. And this time, there was no curiosity, no question, only a quiet understanding that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. "Be careful who you decide to trust," she said, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as something closer to advice. And then she turned away, stepping into the space that parted for her without resistance, without hesitation. As if the room itself knew her role in it had ended, Adrian did not follow her with his eyes. He did not move immediately. He simply remained where he was, composed, grounded, like everything that needed to happen already had, and the rest was just aftermath. My breath finally released in a slow, unsteady exhale I had not realized I was holding, the weight of the moment settling into something heavier, something permanent. I stood there, unsure what came next, unsure where I was supposed to go, because the version of me that had walked into this shift no longer existed, and the one standing here now did not know the rules of the world she had just stepped into. Adrian rose then, his movement smooth, controlled, drawing attention without asking for it, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else seem secondary. He turned toward me fully for the first time since the note, and when his eyes met mine, there was no distance left in it, no separation between observer and participant, only decision, only consequence. He stepped closer, stopping just within reach, close enough that I could see the exact moment his expression softened, not into kindness, not into something simple, but into something deliberate, chosen. "You made a choice tonight," he said quietly, his voice steady, carrying only to me. "And choices have weight." My heart pounded harder at that, not from fear this time, but from the realization that he was not asking me anything, not questioning me, only stating what already was. I swallowed, my voice barely steady enough to form words. I did not know what else to do, I admitted, and for a moment, silence stretched between us again, but it felt different now, less like a threat and more like something being considered. Adrian studied me for a second longer, and then, just slightly, he nodded, as if that answer was enough, as if I had passed something I did not even realize I was being tested on. "Good," he said, and there was something final in it, something that settled into place like a lock clicking shut. "Because from now on," he added, his gaze never leaving mine, "you do not get to pretend you are not part of this." The words landed with a quiet certainty that echoed far louder than anything else that had happened that night. And as the room slowly returned to something that looked normal on the surface, as the music continued and the lights still glowed the same way they had before, I understood the truth I had been circling since the beginning. He did not raise his voice, he did not make a scene, he did not force anything. He simply made a decision, and that decision included me.